Hey guys, Benji here with question of the week again. So, question of the week is, what were your next door neighbors like when you were a child? Um, so I'll kind of just go around the neighbors. So, and overall, like, I mean, our neighborhood was fabulous. It was just, kind of America, just Midwest, middle of America, good people. So, to our, like, if I'm looking out from our front porch, to our right were the Bovinets, who were like the nicest, best people ever. Sue was like the sweetest lady in the entire world, and her husband Bill was funniest, most easygoing, nice guy. He ended up, not he ended up, he was making lots of money. They upgraded that house and made it super cool, from making the exterior really nice to putting in a pool and gazebo and, man, you name it. They just really, they were just the nicest. So anytime you were over there swimming, I mean, if it was around lunchtime, Sue would make you lunch, and if it was around dinner, she would have something, for you to eat as well. So they were just, yeah, they were just really nice. Um, Bill, I used to clean his office for him once Vance, his oldest son, went off to college, went off to Mizzou. So I did that for a couple years. I did it every Sunday evening before Sunday evening church. And then what else was it? And then, so yeah, they had Vance and Nicole. So Nicole was probably 3 years younger than me. Super nice, super sweet. Um, Kind of just spitting image of her mom, and then Vance was kind of a spitting image of Bill. Vance, you know, he was the oldest one of the people, of our neighbors, of the kids that played. Him and Christian, and so they played a lot. But Vance was also, I felt like Vance was busier than maybe Christian was. Christian, I felt like, played with us more, like baseball, basketball, football, but also he was probably more into those sports than Vance was. Vance was kind of into music and soccer. I felt like, yeah, I think so. Um, and we probably didn't see Vance as much, but still a ton. Um, so they were incredible neighbors. On our left was an older couple. They had a special needs child, a daughter, named Karen. She would come out and watch us, like, shoot baskets and stuff, and yeah, so it wasn't any, I mean, they were super sweet. We didn't see them that often. They were the Brunings. His name was Tom Bruning. He was big into Thunderbirds, the cars. So I think he was part of a group, or he might have headed up the group. I don't know, but there were always Thunderbirds around, and he always had them and drove them. Tom Bruning. They were super nice. Like, they never complained. We were up late shooting baskets under the lights. When I say late, probably 10 o'clock. Um, Never complained with all of our bike ramps, everything. Just super nice guy. Behind us there wasn't anybody, so behind us the closest thing was the creek, and then Burrow, woods, um, nature refuge or whatever. So that was nice that nothing really happened. Now they ended up putting in some more houses. They put in another street, so there are back neighbors, I think. But when we were there, there was nothing. So we just had access to the woods and forest and creek and all that good stuff. And then up the hill, we had up into the cul-de-sac, we had the Griffiths were on the right. For most of my childhood, I think as I left, there was, man, I can't remember their names. Yeah, younger family that had kids that were kind of Josh and Ryan's age, I think. So they did that. Then we had the Beatties. They were there forever. Norm was the kid. I think they had a daughter too. They were a lot older. I would say they were 8 years older than me. Um, so I always thought Norm was so cool because he just looked cool. Gary, the dad, he had a perfect yard. Didn't know much about them. They didn't come out that often, or I didn't know them. Next to them was the Wassons. So Mark and Scott were our age. Mark was my age. Scott was Christian and Vance's age. They went to church with us, Ron and Diane, who ended up moving to Arizona. But they were super nice, so I spent a lot of time there. Diane, super nice. Ron, super. He was funny, goofy, and I think because he was like so smart, because Scott was so smart as well. So um, they were, yeah, you knew they were smarter than you the whole time, I think, but still overly nice. So I hung out with them a lot just because Mark and I were good friends and we spent a lot of nights back and forth. Now, probably as we got a little bit older, Mark and Josh might have spent more time because they both like fishing. I never really did like fishing. And so they would go fish in different places. Now, Mark ended up being a professional fisherman, like that's what he does for his living. He's got a, boat and sponsors and, stuff all over. He looks like a race car driver and cashes checks that are, 4 foot wide and 2 feet tall. So he's like a real fisherman, not like a guy that likes to fish. But spent a lot of time there. Spent a lot of time. So they ended up moving to Deer Run, a few neighborhoods down. I don't know, maybe a mile. It's hard to remember. But just down the road, just down Duncan Road. So then I spent time over there too, because Mark and I were just close, probably mostly from church. Is because I would say we were probably the two stalwarts of our grade. In church, there was also John Bennett. There was also Mark Urban. There were also some other guys, but they kind of just didn't, John Bennett, he was really, the three of us probably hung out a lot as kids, but as he got older, I think he just stopped coming, I guess, probably. He became more of a hellion than maybe Mark or I. Mark was kind of a hellion though too. So yeah, but that was that neighbor, and then straight up the cul-de-sac were the words. Where, yeah. The funny thing is that we spent so much time with the words and with Ryan, Jason, and Christian, but not much time in their house because that's just kind of how it was back then, right? Like my parents didn't want us coming inside, and the Words parents didn't want us coming inside. They'd kind of be like, "What are you doing in here?" Like, "Oh, we're getting a drink of water." Like, "Okay, fine, but then get out." And we would, and it was the same thing at my house. That's why I think we ended up drinking so much water out of the garden hose growing up, because our parents didn't really want us inside, and so and that was okay. But it's also probably why we spent so much time like going to 7-Eleven up the street. We would ride our bikes up. It's probably actually not that far. It seemed like it was kind of far at the time, but we would ride our bikes up a quarter mile, half a mile up to the main intersection. And across the street from us was a 7-Eleven. So we'd go up there and yeah, you take 75 cents and you get a Slurpee and a candy bar or something. Candy bars were probably, yeah, 35 or 40 cents, and a Slurpee is probably the same. And then if you were really rich or we had some money from something that you were doing, you would play arcade games, because in the 7-Eleven they had 2 arcade games all the time. Those would switch out here and there. And the funny part is like they were in there because people played them a lot. Because you didn't have, until Nintendo came around, or I mean, you had Atari, but it was nowhere near as good as like the arcade games. And so, man, we would dump a bunch of money in like Spy Hunter. I remember was there, the driving game. I think it was called Spy Hunter. I think so. There was another driving game that had 2 driving wheels, and so steering wheels that you could go with. So we spent a bunch of money doing that. But anyway, but of course, so the Words were our neighbors, and they were the ones that we just spent every waking hour with, especially me and Josh and Jason and Ryan. Just because Christian was older. I mean, Christian was hung out just as much as us until he got to be 16. As soon as everybody got their driver's license, they would just fall off. They'd fall off. So they're hanging out with their friends. They're hanging out with girls. They got a job. They're out making money. We were still stuck riding our bikes and playing baseball and football and basketball in the neighborhood. So at the end, it was just me, Jason, Ryan, and Josh. Now next to them were the Evans. They were also church people. Super nice. Jim was super, super funny guy. Really nice. Diane was nice. They had two little kids, and when I say little, they actually were like really little. I think Jim was short. I can't remember because I was a little kid. I probably didn't. I don't know, but I think he was. I think he was shorter than Dad and John Cornick and all those guys. But we picked on Nathan and Matthew. Not so much Matthew, because Matthew was probably little. He was probably 4. Matthew was probably 7 or 8, and man, we picked on that kid. We shouldn't have. We were mean to him, and I regret that. But he got big enough for a while where he started playing baseball with us. He could never play football or basketball. He was just really little, but baseball, he could hit still. And so next thing you know, we were like, okay, we got an extra kid. And so he would start playing with us. Plus, it made it nice because then we could use their yard more without feeling so guilty, as long as Nathan played with us. Because, all these families that we played baseball in their yard, I mean, a lot of times we would ruin stuff, or we're hitting their house. It's with a Nerf ball or tennis ball, but still, you're hitting their roof all day long. So if you could include people, that always helped. The people next to them, I actually don't even know their names. They were super nice. They would come out and sit on their front porch and watch us play baseball or basketball or football. It's just something to do. They were an older couple. They had a younger kid, Angie. Yeah, that was her name. Had to be grandkid, I assume. I don't know. They were super nice. I wouldn't say that they were weird, but they just didn't have any kids, and so. But they were nice. But their house was shortstop and left center field, and so they got the most bangs. And sometimes we would hit their front glass pane door with a tennis ball really hard, and it made a really loud sound. And they never came out and yelled at us. They would come out and just watch us play, and cheer us on. And yeah, I mean, just super nice people. I mean, I don't know if I would be fine with it, actually. I would, because I love seeing kids out playing baseball and basketball, and if somebody was playing in my yard, I'd be like, heck yeah, destroy the yard, I don't care. Just because I like seeing that. But man, those people were nice to be able to do that. And then next to them were the Davenports. Were there. They were fine. They were fine. Didn't know much about them. And then I don't actually know what happened, actually, now that I think about it. We were so young that it was a big deal, but his son, Tim Davenport, maybe? Man, I can't remember. But anyway, I think their kid was like up for suspicion of murder or an accident, or did something bad. But after that, it was kind of a weird deal with their house. But I can't remember. Again, you're so young, and you just hear your parents talking over some of this other stuff. But yeah, I don't know. But that was our neighbors, and then down the street were like, other people. Behind the words was Phil Colson, and when he moved in, we played a ton on across the street from him. Before Phil got there was the Suttons, Bonnie and Steve, and Grant and Brian. So we played a ton with them, took swimming lessons with them, all that kind of stuff, from Jim Word, up the street. And then Carl Calcara was down in the new part. Steve McCartan down, I guess you'd call it 2 blocks away. Steve came up and played with us just as much as anybody. He was the same age as Jason. And so for sure, the entire time that Christian and Vance were there, then Steve was there. So Steve was a good basketball player. He was good at all sports, just regular athletic guy. So, so he played basketball, baseball, football with us. Um, so that was fun. That was the nice part about the neighborhood, and I've said this before in other videos, is that there were just a lot of kids, and everybody played sports for the most part. We had other kids like John Thompson that would come over from other um, neighborhoods and come over and play. He was just across the way in Weatherstone, so he would come over and play. He knew Jason and Vance. I think he knew Jason from, might have known Christian from debate. They were both big debaters. Christian was like, I think, state champion debater. If not state champion, was in the semis and finals every year. Christian was super smart. Ended up going to Georgetown, got his law degree somewhere big, maybe from Georgetown Law, makes millions of dollars a year as a big time lawyer up in DC. And then John Thompson was also a debater, was also big into that and really successful, and also became a big success here in Kansas City for things. But so I think they knew each other, and then I also think John and Vance knew each other from soccer, even though there was a 1 year age gap there. And so people just kind of had friends that would come over. Carrie Layhow from church spent a lot of time with Vance. They were good friends, and they'd come over and we'd play, and we just played everything. And so we just always had our main core of people that played every day. I would say I would almost say Vance played a lot. I wouldn't say he played every day. Christian, Jason, Ryan, me, Josh, Steve McCartan, those 6 played all the time. And then you had some times where Mark Wassam would play and Vance plays. So all of a sudden you've got 8. And then you have Carl Calcara and Phil Colson that played. Phil's little brother Keith never played. I don't think he just wasn't athletic, I guess. He didn't play. And then when we were younger, we had Brian and Grant Sutton that played. So there were always kind of, call it 6 to 10 kids that were playing. And with 6 to 10 kids, you can really play sports. And so that made it nice. I feel like the neighbors, besides us and the Bovinets, you didn't really do a whole lot together. I think the Griffiths were friends with the Words. They would be up there swimming a lot of times. But the parents were kind of inside their houses more, it felt like, or doing yard work, and they just weren't out there. Like my dad was out playing basketball more than anybody, or throwing. Like no other dads were outside like playing catch. I think it was because they were like, why do I have to go out and play catch? You can just grab one of the kids and go play catch. Where dad would come out and throw us 500. It's a baseball game. You throw the ball up, you have to catch it. If you catch it, it's $100. Catch it on a bounce, it's 50 points. And first to 500 wins. He would also come out and play a lot of basketball. They also, like John Cornick sometimes would come over and play basketball, and Mark Rains and Bill Bovinet. Now that didn't happen a whole lot, but sometimes. So they come over and play, and I'd want to play with it, but I was just too little to. And then by the time I was big enough and tall enough to play with them, was probably better than them, they were too old to play anymore without getting hurt. So never really got to play with them. But so yeah, that's another thing, is that right across from us was another neighborhood called Weatherstone. They had a main thing, but then they also had this one street, and that's where John Cornick and Mark Rains lived, who were dad's buddies. They would go running. They played church softball, church basketball, church everything. And so we had their families of, Jamie Cornick and Holly Rains and Brett Rains. And so it was kind of just this whole group of people between the Rains and the Cornicks and the Evans and the Bovinets and the Wassons and the Lewises, us, where they're just a big group of kids, a big group of families that did things together. They went out for dinners, I think, or had potluck dinners together. We went after church to like Zarda for lunch with everybody. I mean, there'd be a table of kids that was, 8 or 10 of us, and then the parents, were there on their own table at Zarda. And So yeah, it was a whole big group of community. So it was super nice. Like I say it all the time, like my childhood is like perfection. Like if a score out of 100, I don't know if I can give it 100. 100 seems really good. I think the only thing, and again, it's not missing. I guess the only thing you could be is richer, but I don't think that would have helped any because I didn't think we weren't rich, right? Is that each year, you go down to like every summer you go to like Lake of the Ozarks for a weekend, and I thought that was vacation. That was vacation. It was great. And we would go down to Windermere, like this resort down there, and I think John Cornick's dad had a boat. Mark Raines might have had his own boat. He was an attorney. I think he had a boat. And so you got two boats down there and people are swimming. And I mean, so that was vacation and that was good. And the rest of the time was just like playing outside and swimming because the Bovinets had a pool and the Words had a pool. So we thought we were rich because we had two neighbors that had pools. And I mean, people had cars. I mean, people had nice cars, right? Bill Bovinet next door, who did really well for himself. I mean, he always had nice cars. He always had these Mark Sevens, Lincoln Mark Sevens, maybe Lincoln Mark 8. Can't remember what the number was, but they were fabulous. And then he had a Suburban, and Vance had a nice car. His son, Jim Evans up the street, insurance guy, he ended up getting a Porsche 944. So there were hints of money, but I don't think everybody was rich. But yeah, I don't know. So would I give it 100 out of 100? I don't know. I guess I can't. I feel like 100 out of 100 is weird, but it's a 99. So the question was, what were your next door neighbors like when you were a child? I would say perfect, right? I would say the Bovinets were perfect. They were the nicest, sweetest, best people ever. The Griffiths were nice. They had daughters, so we didn't really hang out with them, and they were younger than us, so I don't know. We just didn't hang out with them. The Beatties were to their own. They had kids that were older, so they were older when we got there. The Wassons we hung out with as a family and as friends. The Words we pretty much grew up with. If I was to say who'd you grow up with, like I grew up with the Words. The Lewisons and the Words kind of, yeah. We were the neighborhood families, just with the kids, with the boys, with playing and everything. And then the Evans were family and friends church. The other the one neighbors were super nice. They were quiet and they didn't really do anything. And then right across the street, the Davenports were fine. They had some family issue. Something goes on. I'm curious to know what happened with that. And then right next to us was the Brunings with Karen, the special needs girl, that she couldn't speak or she wasn't audible or anything. But yeah, I mean, just salt of the earth people all around us. Nobody was like, there wasn't anybody that was mean. We didn't have a grumpy old guy that was like, get off my lawn. No, we were like climbing in people's trees at 11 o'clock at night playing flashlight tag. We would get on people's roofs. Like, surely they heard us out there. And I think they must have just said, like, I think that's the kids outside. And they're climbing on our roofs. And they're climbing on our decks. And they're hiding all over. And everybody, I assume, just said, like, hey, at least they're not being stupid. Or they're not out causing trouble. Or they're not doing drugs. Or, I don't know. But they really let us do whatever we wanted to do. So everybody was just perfect. So what were your next door neighbors like? As a child, I would say they were perfect. It was great. Everybody was fabulous. So, yeah, long answer. I thought that was going to be a short video. I think that every time, though.